Hey folks, welcome to another edition of Construction Over Coffee. I'm your host, Jeff Raymond, and I am very, very excited to have Benjamin Gardner on the show with us. Benjamin has been with DPS since 2001. One thing I really appreciate about him is his dedication to improving the built environment, a very diverse background in architecture, construction, and construction management. Currently at DPS, he serves as the firm's chief executive officer and a working principal, where he's focused on the firm's growth, maintaining the firm's culture, and creating opportunities for both staff and clients. So without any further delay, Benjamin, thanks for joining us. Great having you on the show, and excited to see what we talk about today.
Yeah, great to be here.
Absolutely. So Benjamin, we did an introduction there. Would love to hear a little bit about, and sure the viewers would love to hear a little bit about more your background in your words, how you got to where you're at today, and we'll open up with that.
Okay, well, from a young age, I had an interest in architecture, building, making things, creating. That came a lot from my father. He had, he had three sons and called us his crew a lot. So we were always working with him, and he was a master in what he did. Did a lot of woodworking and was kind of an architect as a construction builder. Taught us a lot about construction, kind of his philosophy of building, making furniture, and craftsmanship. That transferred through my teen years to work in construction, getting out of school, and always worked some kind of trade, multiple of trades. And after getting out of the service, looked at going back to school and studying architecture. While I was in school, working my way through school, through architecture, worked as in the construction industry, but also started to do some freelance design work and document production work on limited service hotels. That got my skills up a little bit. And then right out of school, after I got my master's in architecture, I joined the firm and really got a new experience in what the industry was really about. Got more of the business side of the industry, introduced to that and what it took to really produce good architecture. It was a lot more than just what I think a number of students coming out of school think it is. You just get to design great buildings. Well, you have to become very skilled in a lot of different things. Consultant coordination, management, people management, communication, proposal and grant writing, which I thought I never even imagined I would be doing in my career. But you have to go out and get work as well as do the work. So it was an interesting start, and all those things, the construction background really helped me immensely, looking at constructability and the reality of what it takes to get a building done. And I have a lot of respect for contractors and what they have to go through to pull off some of the crazy designs that we can come up with sometimes.
Agreed. That's a fairly interesting story and background about how you got into the industry. Thank you for your service as well. Did you enlist right out of high school, and then after your contract was up, you went you pursued that architecture path of education, or
Well,
something else along the way?
It was a few years after high school. I kind of played around a lot. I grew up in a place that had a wonderful ski valley up in Taos, New Mexico, and so I worked up there a bit, skied around. But joining the service was something that afforded me the opportunity to travel. And
Yes.
I never regret the time in the service, because it gave me a whole different perspective on the world, And then after getting out of the service, it gave me a whole new perspective on where I grew up and what I hadn't really realized was around me in that environment. And I came back, I learned all the names of the mountains of where I was, where I lived, and a lot of stuff that opened my eyes to a bigger picture. But I had the GI Bill money, so I thought, let's go back to school, pursue an interest in architecture and design, following a little bit of my father's footsteps, but trying to formalize that training. And that really was an interest. I think, having some maturity from coming out of the service and coming into school instead of doing it right from high school, also gave me a different perspective on the importance of how serious I should take that education, and also the broader range of education that I should try to give myself.
Sure. It sounds like your father had a pretty big impact in your life in that manner too, in the built environment, the craftsmanship.
Yeah, he craftsmanship, what he made and what he created, he was passionate about every piece of it. Every piece of work. He was super critical of his own work, but passionate about what he put into it, and really thought about it in a degree that I try to remember as we go through, and to mentor other folks in our firm about. The story I tell about his definition of craftsmanship was when we were making furniture, hardwood furniture, very contemporary. And I would do the sanding of that furniture. That was the finishing was a part that he had me most involved in. And he would get upset when he'd look underneath the desk in the back where no one would ever see it, and that the finish wasn't exactly the way it was on the top of the piece of furniture. He'd pull out a drawer and turn over the drawer and look at the bottom of the drawer. And if that didn't have the same quality of finish that we had on the top, he would be upset. And he said, that's why people pay us the money they pay us for this fine wood furniture. It's because craftsmanship is as fine where you'll never see it as it is on the top. And I try to instill that and try to live by that. With that, nothing's perfection, but you have to get to a sense, but that passion for putting things together and making sure you're doing it right has stuck with me, and I try to instill that in our firm with everything that we do.
I remember you, and thank you for sharing that story with our viewers. I remember you telling me that story in an initial call, and it stuck with me, and I've shared it. Didn't tell it as good as you did, but I've shared it with some of the colleagues at my firm, and it's something that really resonates, and that's a cool story.
And it should, because it's important. Means you care. Caring is I don't know. We see some of that diminishing over time. What people
Certainly.
really care about and what people really get passionate behind.
Agreed. Well, I think that's a great segue to the next question here, which is, what do you love about what you're able to do and what you do?
Well, I love learning. Still in my position, I learn something new every day. I think that's one of the tremendous parts of the culture we have established at our firm, and we really maintain, is personal and professional development is paramount in everything that we do. I love creating. I also love to see people interact with those environments that we put together, and enjoy it and be able to have an experience. We think of say a typical office building that we do, how do we make going to work fun? How can we make it a place where people want to go? That's what we really concentrated on when we designed our own office, is what is going to be, I want people lining up outside the door to get in this place. And we have that. We have a high level of interest in what we do because we enjoy it, and the environment that we do it in allows a certain amount of freedom and autonomy, people to kind of create their own path. And our office is that way. It's a very open office, somewhat structured, but a lot of engagement, a lot of buzz, excitement. Just people where people want to be, and we see that when clients come in, they're amazed that we're moving so fast, and everything's out in the open. It's transparent. We have bowls of, it's actually right now we have a big bowl of dirt from one of our sites, and all these rocks and artifacts that we've collected from a site out in the Navajo Nation. It's absolutely beautiful. Just it's a painting in itself, and we didn't have to do anything except scrape it up off the ground and kind of put it on the table. People wonder, what's that about, and how's that inspiring our design and what we create. And just looking at those little things, never forgetting the small things that make an environment what it is, the stories.
Really, that's a really cool story, and I think a great way of looking at it. I think a lot of folks have different opinion on what defines great architecture, what makes it important, unique, and you ask one versus another individual and they'll have different opinions. One of the more interesting ways I've heard it explained is, great architecture can certainly, and it's not word for word here, but it can certainly fulfill a purpose. If you need A, it gives you A. If it gives you B, it gives you B. But personally, what I've found is great architecture invokes something, typically fairly strong emotions, whether it's, the feeling of freedom, whether it's the feeling that you can be more productive, whether it's a feeling of togetherness or fondness for something. I find great architecture invokes something pretty strongly. And that what you say about, we'd love to have people lining up to get into something we've built. I really believe if more folks looked at it that way, I think you'd see much different designs than what are kind of being pushed out, for sure. I think that's a great way of looking at it.
Well, it's all about the experience. Whether you're in a building, or you're around a building, or you're up in the mountains, it's what is that feeling you get, and how can we, through our designs, replicate that a little bit, or create something new and different that make people think. Just kind of, I love it when I experience some architecture that just stops me in my tracks and makes me say, what is this about? I've seen some pretty wild stuff that I wouldn't necessarily immediately call great architecture, but it works at some level, and that's what I try to do when I experience spaces. Is what is it about that I may not be seeing? What's the perspective that somebody had when they created this? And a lot of my colleagues are curious about that, because I can bring some strange examples of what I think is great architecture. I brought in a warehouse to a project at one point. And I said, this is just, I was so excited about it. This is just fantastic. And people were like, it's a warehouse. What is it? It just worked so well. It was done so well from industrial functional standpoint that, to me, it was beautiful. It just had all the pieces that folks needed, and you could see in the way that it functioned that folks experiencing it appreciated it, and it worked for them.
I was going to ask you, Was there anything, examples that you could give? And I guess there's one right there.
Yeah.
And you'll have one side of folks that will say, well, the idea of wowing or creating an intense emotion or doing things in the way that you or I may suggest, it just doesn't seem practical, Jeff, or it just doesn't seem practical, Benjamin. And when I hear that, I like to push back a little bit and say, well, nothing needs to be over the top or extravagant, but maybe just a few particular attentions to detail here or there can really help something, do that where, hey, you're at a park and a bench is a bench, but I'm sure there's certain things that could be added to that element that make it unique or invoke a certain feeling or have you thinking in a certain way. So what might you say to folks that say, hey, it's just, in every situation that's probably not practical, but hey, you know what, Benjamin, it's not practical to approach things in this way. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a hard one because I am a pretty practical architect. Form follows function, kind of has been a basis uh, of my learned philosophy, but also
Hmm.
whimsy, uh, art, um, and just there's some stuff that I see that I think is absolutely great architecture that isn't practical at all uh, in it, but it has a purpose, and it's about that experience, that making you wonder, making you think differently. Why would they do that long pointed cantilever piece that, you know, how do you work it? My mind always goes to being that practical side of me. How does that work for a space? Um, it's a museum, and that space is really weird. How do you display art in that space? Or what is that space about? Is it just a void? So I think everything has its place. Um, and the architecture that you see, um, that makes you think. It just makes you, I think, a big part of architecture design uh, is wonder. That it, like you said, evokes an emotion or invokes a response from you in some way to make you ask yourself questions about it, to test your perception of it. I often um, try really hard when the viewfinder slide of my brain comes up, when I come into a situation and that slide that this is the way I think it should be comes up and pops into my mind. I stop myself and question, why am I having that reaction? Uh, is it a trained response from something I experienced years ago, either positive or negative, or is it something else that's driving that? Could I look at this a different way? Um, you know, should it change or should I accept it? A lot of that when I when I have a negative reaction, a lot of that comes into my mind just to say, why am I having that? Why is it driving me away, or why does it make me fearful, or someplace that I don't want to be? How could that? How could I adapt or really realize what's going on in that space that I may be losing? And it's awareness.
I think that's a great way to approach life with anything. People say if something triggers you, but that sense of, I think, curiosity and that willingness to be aware and to ask yourself and get familiar with yourself and your thinking patterns, that ability to do that serves individuals exceptionally well in the built environment. But beyond that too, I think it's a fantastic way to go through life. And you
It's
have me thinking where great architecture, or I guess anything that gets you thinking, it can almost be we may be getting a little philosophical here, but it almost is a way for you to get to know yourself better. If you're willing to
No,
go down that path of awareness and
it's definitely
questioning.
that, and you know, what frustrates me is all those times that I don't, that I'm complacent in my uh, understanding. I had a great quote that I got off of a thing that I've been using a lot. I've been trying to tell myself it's impossible for a person to learn what he thinks he already knows. And I'm not sure who said that, but it was for me something that caught my eye and goes to what I just said. How can I learn if I think I already know it?
Epictetus, I'm butchering his name.
Yeah, that's it, right.
Yeah. Very true. Very true in your industry too, right?
Yep.
So you've had the ability to work on some really interesting stuff. I imagine, on your website, there's a couple projects that you speak to very fondly, that have really stood out to you. So for the viewers, is there anything in your career where you look back and you say, done a lot of great things, but this one really stood out, and this is why?
Um, yeah, there's a lot of those, but you know, it's hard to encapsulate that in one project. It's
Sure.
pieces of projects that really, those are you know, I'm a detail guy. So, you know, how two materials come together, how those little details mean a lot to me. But I
Mhm.
think some of our best projects that have meant the most to me have been the work we've done with a school for blind and visually impaired here in New Mexico.
Okay.
Um, that was just um, it was a lesson in that perspective and what you think you know uh, throughout the whole design process. Um, you know, some of the most important parts of the school for the blind and visually impaired were how we dealt with light and what people will actually experience, be it uh, if they have an impairment.
Mhm.
One of the things we were taught was the canopies that we did out. We did some shade canopies outside, and the shade pattern that they made on the ground really confused some folks that had impairment
Sure.
because they couldn't really tell what it was as they walked through those spaces. Um, so, and the same thing with another project we did for the school for the deaf here, um, in which um, acoustics was a huge part of the design of the project.
Sure.
Um, because deaf people, when they're speaking, usually don't know their volume. Uh, so
Point.
they could be screaming it out, and in some cases, that is exactly it. They're expressing themselves in this volume that they're not aware of, but those
Mhm.
around and how they, especially for the staff that are trying to teach with them and
Mhm.
to keep control of the space and to make it comfortable, were great. But those two populations really taught me a lot about um, how fortunate we all are that don't have those disabilities and how important it is to make sure that
Mhm.
we're attentive to multiple disabilities or impairments that people have, uh, that they're included in our thought about the environments that we design, um, and
Yeah.
that transcends just those kind of disabilities to almost all disabilities, um,
Mhm.
and mental health issues. You know, how do we think about that to so that we are inclusive in our design, um, and providing opportunities for everybody to enjoy something that we've created.
fantastic way to approach it. I don't think we're starting to see a more focus on the inclusion aspect. But I can imagine that seeing the impact that your work has when it's approached with that mindset on a population that's typically underserved, I think it could probably radically shape or alter someone's view on life tremendously.
Yeah, it's just, I with whatever population we deal with, it's just so rewarding to see when it works. And when, for me, in between the Army and architecture, I did some chefing because I
Mhm.
really needed to create something that I could see enjoyed and get a
Sure.
response to quickly. And food was a great way to do that.
There
Uh,
is.
so it was that instant gratification for me and seeing people enjoy what I created. And it was a little selfish, but
Yeah.
it just motivated me. And those things I really look for what motivates me.
Quicker turnaround time on some quiche than an office building, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely a souffle, something like that. Gets people to go ooh have that wonder and that, but it's not as sustained as
Sure.
architecture. As I've learned over the career, that some of the buildings and that have gone through are terrific and stick with you.
One thing that
Yes.
I, you bring up really interesting things that for me to think about here, Benjamin. And one of them is, after speaking to people for almost the last decade that are exceptional at what they do, and I find that they approach something. Sometimes they realize it, sometimes they don't. But the things that they do, they tend to approach it with a high degree of awareness and a high degree of deliberateness. And for some, as you mentioned, it can be there that is expressed in the food that they create. Some of the greatest chefs in the world that the world has ever known. I would almost argue or try to make the point that the way that some of the greatest architects approach their craft is very similar across the board, with a lot of other professions. Sports, for example. Kobe Bryant was a great one. Michael Jordan in basketball. They used to think about exactly what they were likely to do in that game and visualize it and go over it. And the idea was no move was wasted. And in the culinary profession, same, no ingredient is wasted. Everything's deliberate. And in your profession, um, I imagine that there's no space. There's no, stroke of the pencil that gets wasted per se. It's very deliberate and it's very focused, and there's likely, there is a purpose behind it and an outcome desired. And I've noticed that across all the greats in their respective professions. So it's really cool to hear you talk about that because it kind of
It's,
reinforces this belief I have.
it goes back to having that passion in the spots that people will never experience or find, um, that you've thought about it, you've designed it. People, it goes back to my father's craftsmanship thing.
Yep.
People may not see it, may not experience it, but they'll know it's there when they feel it or they enter it. Um, it's the unseen. Uh,
There's
it's
that saying. Go ahead. Sorry.
it's how you can. I don't know. For me, it's how I can know somebody's inherently good at heart when I meet them. It's that the impression they're not wearing a sign on their chest that tells them, or actions. I can just, I have that feeling.
There's that saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. And if you do the entire surface area of the desk the same way, leaving everything uniform even and pay attention to all details, well, that says a lot. Same thing in the space. And I kind of like some of those universal platitudes that are applicable to a lot of things, when you can see a lot of crossover. That's really cool. In your industry, right, there's probably certain things that you experience that no other industry will experience, and those may be great things. And on the flip side, there may be challenges that either your firm faces or you face or your industry as a whole faces. And I'm curious, if there's anything on that side that you want to tell our viewers about and talk about.
God, that's a good question, but I think it goes back to engagement. Finding your purpose, what you have to do, and through our industry, right? As most industries right now, really having a hard time finding talent and the people to
Mhm.
fill the roles that we need. Things that we struggle with are making sure people are constantly engaged, and that the complacency is not. There's no room for complacency in what we're doing. Keeping that passion and that excellence in what we do, kind of being driven towards that. I think everybody's facing that. I think our industry is really facing that in a lack of people that are embracing architecture as a profession and as a career.
Yeah.
Right now, we're seeing some declining enrollment. Our school here in New Mexico has actually seen an increase in enrollment, which is exciting
Mhm.
for us. I think that architects haven't been telling the story of what's changed in architecture as well as we should have been doing
Yes.
for a number of years. It's an exciting field that is embracing
Yes.
huge amount of new technology, uh, a lot of challenges because of the pace of technology and growth. Changing right now, I know a lot of people are worried about AI and how does that, we'll just
Mhm.
have the computer create the environment. And I think that goes to that, do we get the feeling that we have, the experience of that? Is that still going to be valid and genuine in what's designed totally by computer in that? But I also think there's a place for that. There's a place for using that tool, but also having judgment in there. But I think the biggest challenge with most people in most businesses is that everything's moving so fast that sometimes it's hard to fully understand the story and the purpose behind it.
Mhm.
And slowing down a little bit to find that purpose and to have clarity around that is a struggle. I say it's a struggle for me. I see it as a struggle for folks that are coming in the firm.
Mhm.
I see it with the technology that the pandemic has. There's a lot of silver linings to the pandemic, which I won't go into now. But one of the things I've seen that's something that may be not so good is um, the inability to have those collisions, those impromptu uh, aha moments between people. In our office, I think that's one of the greatest things that's caused that buzz in our office. Is just walking by and hearing what's going on and seeing something really cool happening, and you want to be a part of that, and you engage in that, and you find out something new that drives you, and it stops you. I try to do that a lot to on our Tuesdays and Thursdays when we have everybody in the office. I make it a point to go up and walk around the office and just see what's going on and have conversations. Ask people what they're working on, take a look at it, and you know, I have the opportunity to chime in when I want to, and I encourage other people to do that too. So it may not be your project, you're not stepping out on your toes, but if you see something that you have an idea about, let somebody else know. Let's have a conversation about it, because it could pull them out of their tunnel vision of what they're working on. And that's something I always try to do is, if I'm working on a proposal or even a contract or a design, I will purposely find somebody who has nothing to do with that and ask them to look at it and see if they understand what I'm trying to relate. Because I get, I talk in architecture speak a lot around the office
Sure.
with other architects. And are we doing that with our clients? Are we doing that in our proposals? Do they really realize what we're trying to sell? So basically, it's telling that story. How do we tell our story about what we do as architects, what we do in the industry, and how that is a benefit to clients, to the community, to all that we're engaged in.
You brought up something really interesting that I think is starting to become a talking point again for folks, which is that with that collaboration aspect, and we'll focus on it being in the in-person sense. The last couple of years, I think remote, fully remote, hybrid started to expand and be more of a thing. And a lot of the folks we work with and speak to, they notice a drastic difference when there's that opportunity to, as you say, collide, have impromptu aha moments to when they collaborate with each other.
Yeah.
And for all the advances we've made in the last couple of years, I think that opportunity to collaborate and to bounce ideas off one another, I think it's been forgotten by some folks. And hearing that and reinforcing, the belief of how important that is, I think that's something that, more people are starting to pay attention to again. That's where the magic happens. I think that's where there's real room for discovery. And when there was that participation and there's that safety and freedom that comes with knowing, you can listen to one another and trust one another. There's a lot to be said for that. And unfortunately, not every company has it, but the ones that do, there's a clear divide between the work that they put out and the work they produce, and those that don't have that opportunity, unfortunately.
Well, it's interesting because for Zoom meetings, for Teams meetings, for all the virtual meetings I have, I try to be early, a couple of minutes, because I'm finding those are the opportunities to have those collisions and those talks when somebody else is on and maybe the whole meeting hasn't arrived. You get to have those conversations we used to have when we came into a conference room. There's a couple of people sitting there waiting. How was your weekend? What did you do? Skiing, stuff like that, having those conversations. Yeah. So trying to work it because that's just my nature. I want to have those chats. So it's great.
Sure.
We've had some of those sessions, really kind of take up some of the meeting time. And this is one thing with Zoom and this, it's just, we're here all to get down to business and let's go. The agenda is 1, 2, 3. Sometimes it's good to go a little off script and off agenda. Just to break that, again, thinking we know what we're all talking about. Sometimes I know the Native Americans here, in some of the training I've had, their stories and their answers to questions are kind of a circular journey I was taught really, really early not to get frustrated at some of our clients like that when they didn't answer the question, but to listen more, because the story they told was actually their answer to the question, even though I wasn't getting a direct answer. They're telling me something in a different way. And I thought that was fascinating because it made me listen, made me think differently, as I've been saying, take a different perspective and really kind of, what do they mean by that? And if you really, in my experience, if I'm really listening and give it enough time, I can come away with the proper answer. One of my professors in school was famous for that. He would never answer a question directly. Always take it off in a different direction or a different tangent. And a couple of years in school, we all thought he was senile. And then we figured it out that he actually was making us think differently about it, making us take a different perspective.
The answer's in the message. It's just presented differently. Love it. We talked, we talked about the last couple of years there, and you said stuff has changed on your end, on the company's end. Let's talk about that pandemic for a minute, because it was a big shift for a lot of folks. How did y'all navigate that? What were the early months like, and what had changed during that time and since?
Well, we as a company were very fortunate. Because, and myself as a CEO was very fortunate because my predecessor had, in one of the Zika virus or another virus, had said, we should have a disaster recovery plan in the firm that talks about what happens if a place burns down or we get hit by a tornado or, we lose key individual or something like this. So a group of us in the firm got together and kind of crafted that plan. And we put it together and, what we do in these different circumstances and who is our contact and what. And then we stuck it in the safe and called it a day because none of that stuff popped up. So when I took over, I kind of thought, well, it'd be, we got to change the contact people now and we have to update that plan. And we updated that plan. Thank goodness. Because when the pandemic hit, we had a plan. We had a way to pivot our organization to remote work. We had the additional bandwidth in place. We had things that were part of that planning effort covered. So it was amazing. I right away, I think that 2 weeks, a week or 2 weeks before everybody was basically sent home, mandated by our governor, I sent everybody home. I just said, don't want people to get sick. And that's always been our thing. If you're sick and you're not feeling good, work from home or take some time off, get better. But we pivoted to a 100% remote and never lost a beat in what we did. It was amazing, kind of easy. The biggest concerns we had and the biggest changes we had are the way we took care of it and communicated with each other. We really had to learn how, what it was to reach out to each other at all different levels of the firm all the time, and how important that communication was. Even the just the calls to find out how people were doing, if their family was sick, if that, and support each other in those things. If somebody got sick, it was just unquestioned that other people would help pick up that load and continue on with the projects. It was a great learning experience. Some of the things that changed are some of the silver linings I talked about. Our office, our kind of satellite offices, we were really, in hindsight, struggling to communicate back and forth between those offices and have the same culture and same dialogue, knowledge sharing, learning with those. There were some stumbling blocks out as they were different profit centers. And that changed over the pandemic because we needed those resources to fill those holes that we have should somebody get sick or, to take care of loved ones or something like this. So we learned how to communicate a lot better with each other. And we also learned that we're there for each other. We have each other's backs as a business, and even people that really, are acquaintances more than friends, really picked it up and learned a different way to interact. And that has been sustained through the pandemic, and if you can call it post-pandemic. That just we're one firm now. We were one firm before, but we didn't act like it. Now we act like it. And that's been a great change. Also embracing change of how we work. We were forced to. I know that, chaos is the great changer because you have to adapt. I know when I was an executive, a leadership group, I would always end our meetings with, I'm going to go back to my office and create chaos. That way things change and we start to think differently about what we do, question it. And I told all my staff as I became CEO in our C-suite group, I said, if I hear this is the way we've always done it, that's going to cause me to want to change stuff and question it. So let's promote that throughout the firm. How are we changing stuff? And embrace that change. All the way down to, our dress policies, our ways of thinking, the way we did business before, how we engage with clients, our levels of transparency in the firm. I am not shy to send out my proposal with all the other consultants' proposals attached to it to show what all our fees are and be very transparent with folks about what it's going to cost us to do the work for them. And it's funny, I was in an interview yesterday and the client at the end of the interview asked us, what is your expectation of us? And I said, honesty, engagement, respect, and transparency. Those are the things that we're going to give to them, and we expect to get back from them. That'll make us true collaborators, true partners in this endeavor, and make the projects a success for them.
My, oh my, does that strike a chord? So important to approach that relationship as a partnership and not get caught up in a transactional nature, at least speaking personally here.
Well, I'm never going to be a yes man.
Mhm.
I hope my clients understand that. They hire me to give them guidance and advice and design. And
Yes.
if I see something that's not going to serve either one of us well, I'm going to make it known.
Yes. Around here, we say something, they're not buying the proposal. They're buying the results that only you can deliver. I think we have a very similar approach to that. Happy to be transparent. This is exactly what it is, but you're not buying the percentage, you're not buying the proposal, you're investing in a partnership with somebody that can do something for you that likely no other firm can. And I think your situation is almost parallel to that as well. This is a really good segue into values because we started touching on that, and you mentioned honesty, engagement, respect, transparency is what you expect. Let's talk a little bit about your values individually and as a firm. Love to hear that.
Well, I think my values personally mirror the values that we've established as a firm. And we recently, in the last couple of years, visited that. And I have a poster here in my office outside of my door. It's DPS, values through action. And I'll just read them off. Be open, be curious, be responsive, contribute to the solution, build trust, connect and create, think ahead, move forward together. All of those are what I think we should think about in every interaction that we have. They show that we're genuine in our spirit and being true to ourselves as well as true to our product, our processes, our people, and those are my values. Honesty and integrity are inherent in each one of those. That is what I think is very important. It's never lying to yourself about what you care about or how you approach something. Because if you do that, you're not being genuine.
Actually writing those down as you went to be open, be curious, be responsive, contribute to the solution, build trust, connect and create, move forward together. I may have missed one in there.
Think ahead.
Think ahead. Was that before connect and create or after?
That was after connect and create.
I knew in this one. Thank you.
But they're not in no particular, I didn't see them in any particular order, but I think they all have, another level of definition, but I like to kind of leave it out there for me. The thinking ahead, the one that we missed, is really about making sure that it's not just your agenda.
Excellent. People get into the architecture field for different reasons. Common one that we find is, folks do it because someone in their family did it, or somebody they know was in it, or maybe they happen to have a very encouraging and supportive teacher, guidance counselor, or mentor in their life. Outside of that, it's not something where, every kid wants to be either a lawyer or a doctor or work in IT or go into finance and banking. It's not a very mainstream decision. I know at least for me, I wouldn't have been in the trades if my family wasn't in the trades, because there was so many different stigmas and things around that. So for, in your industry, what do you see as a potential path forward to get the next generation excited? And then in what do you see as a path forward to keep the people in the industry engaged and in the industry?
I think our best tool is good architecture, great environments that are engaging, exciting. I think if I look back, some of the wonder that I had when I walked into spaces that, at those times when I was a super young kid, were huge to me, our school, my elementary school, stuff like that. I go back today and I'm like, wow, this is not what I remembered at all. It doesn't have that, it's not as big as my memory has it. It's not as, some of those things. But I had a great environment where I grew up because we have incredible light here, and some of the Pueblo and territorial style architecture that is around New Mexico really helps that light and that change through the day, through the seasons, through everything, creates that space 50 different ways, expresses that space 50 different ways. And I think that's that wonder of those. So if I could think we could do good architecture, that helps to, that is adaptable, that's flexible, that has different meaning at different times and really responds to our environment, can be an encouragement for people to seek that. And I think that's a lot of why folks do get into architecture. They have some experience like that. They have the aha moment that a place, a city, circumstance where they just really, like you said, have an emotional connection with architecture is a big thing. So I think the more good architecture we have, whatever that is, and we talked a little bit about that earlier, could be that wild, nonsensical structure that really feel like, what is that? Do I live in that? Do I work in that? Or is it just a piece of artwork within the horizon? All helps to contribute to that. I also think the more you learn about all the different professions that are industry related, the more it gets me excited about architecture. There's just so much, as I said in the beginning, so much to learn through it. Architects have to be a generalist and a master of a number of different avenues.
Yes.
You'd have to know construction, you have to know the business end of it, you have to, you have to know the qualities of glass, you have to have the qualities of light, the qualities of sound at some level to be able to design well.
Yes.
And that is a never ending, especially in today's environment, where materials are being invented, being used in different ways. It's just fascinating, that constant learning. So I would encourage people that that are teaching architecture, that are interested in architecture, kind of within the industry, to make sure that comprehensive view of what it entails is that story is told well, because it's so exciting, and there's so many different directions you can go as an architect if you want to specialize or you want to be a generalist. If you can get into the details and the weeds really quickly in this profession, and create a specialty. We have some folks in our office that have created their own pathways in architecture, especially around sustainability, energy use, stuff like that are really cutting edge and thinking of. We actually hired our first computer scientist who knows nothing about architecture as somebody to come in and give us perspective and look at the way we do things differently, help us automate some stuff, and also to identify stuff that we shouldn't automate. It should still have that hands-on touch to make it really work. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Sometimes that outside perspective is so refreshing, because if you're caught up in the day to day and you're almost, for lack of a better word, if you're living in this bubble that is focused on, everyone has similar experiences, they're working towards a similar goal, they're kind of in this thought bubble. And then you have somebody come in that doesn't know maybe a ton about the industry, but can still give you fairly direct feedback to their thoughts on the process and what you're doing, that can be invaluable and give you a perspective that you never even considered, because you're just approaching it from the way that you have for years, and you're approaching it as an architect, but maybe not as a computer scientist that may see things differently. And that is, I think, oh so important for a lot of
Well,
things.
well, we're forced to do that with our clients all the time. We'd have to learn their business to be able
Yes.
to design them an environment that works for them. And that takes stepping out of your own thing and admitting, I have no idea about this, but I really ought to do my homework and find out in so many cases. Like we talked about with the school for the blind and visually impaired, the school for the deaf.
Mhm.
Those were so wonderful because they taught me things I would have never, that were counterintuitive to my thinking at the time as a young architect. And make me realize that's what how I have to approach other projects too. It's really with an open mind.
Agreed. Agreed. Keeping an open mind, if you could turn back the wheels of time and have a conversation with your 18-year-old self. Can of worms here. What would you tell him? What would you tell yourself?
I think to read more. And I say that because I really struggled with communication, grammar, speech, English, the English language. Still struggle with that. And I didn't pay enough attention in school to that. I should have read a lot more. Architecture is also a business of getting business. So I say that with the lens of, I've had to write hundreds and hundreds of proposals in my career to try to get work and convince people that we know what we're doing
Sure.
and we can do their projects. And that has really been a struggle, learning environment. So that part of the education, I think I was also telling myself to make sure that I kept that free spirit that I had at that time all through your life, in terms of pursuing your interests, regardless of whether you think there's an ROI or it's going to help you be, it's going to help you on your career path. I look back and I took some courses in college, in my long college career, that had nothing to do with anything. Sign language, mediation, things like this, but it just were an interest. And as I look back, I think I should have taken a lot more of those. I should have explored a lot more avenues for education that may have helped me to become better equipped to deal with the world and to deal with how I thought, or how I was trained to think. But I really, the one thing that I did do at that age is I kept my adventureness. Made sure that I did a lot of stuff while I could. A lot of movement, a lot of exploration, especially after I got out of the service. It really made me think about looking around at all kinds of things and exploring.
Fantastic. If you're to look back in that realm of, you go back, you talk to yourself. If you look back throughout your whole life, who've been some of the most, maybe one, two, three, whatever you feel like sharing, who've some of the most influential people in your life been, and why?
Well, there's a whole slew of musicians that I think were influential. The people as a teen and that I really and still am really into music,
Hmm.
uh, and that is an outlet for me. I have a very eclectic taste, from classical to rock and roll and jazz, you name it. I can't really think, but number of musicians have influenced me uh,
Okay.
in that way. But really, to heart, my father was a inspirational figure and influential in a lot of my thinking, my work ethic, a number of other things that made me um, an individual that could take care of myself and self-sufficient.
Hmm.
Kind of taught me the value of money and the value of work, the value of having an opinion. Uh, some of the other folks that have been influential in that same vein have been a structural teacher that I had in college, uh, Mete Turan. He was a older Turkish gentleman who taught structures at school, and uh, for the first couple of years of school was a total jerk. Just, you know, and I never understood him, and I don't think he ever understood us till we kind of butted heads and were able to um, have a bit of an argument.
Hmm.
Uh, but we developed an understanding of our each other's motivations and agendas, and from there we created a relationship that was very strong. And he challenged me a lot to uh, embrace uh, a stronger academic pursuit of subjects, uh, not just get the, really dive in. And that was into structural engineering, which is a big part of architecture. I
Yes.
think that played off a lot of my background in building and in construction. So he's been influential. And I have to say, my wife, who is a serial entrepreneur, um, really kind of focused me a little bit, and also gave me the confidence to know that I could achieve whatever I put in my mind. Uh, she came from a very uh, hard background and is a very independent woman within a society. She's East Indian, and that society had some real issues that have changed a little bit since then. But she's taught me to go for what you want to go for, and don't be apologetic for it, and also um, don't ever discount the help you get from others in that pursuit. Nothing you make of yourself should be on the backs of others.
Great. And looking at time, it's likely close to time to wrap up. Is there
Yep.
anything you want to, is there anything you want to discuss here that we might have missed?
I'm not really. I think that, for folks, um, it's a great industry. The architecture construction industry
Hmm.
uh, is a great industry. Uh, we need to be thoughtful, uh, especially in this day and age. It's attention to what we're doing. Uh, this industry deals with a lot of the resources that we that we take for granted in the world. Construction is the number one kind of provider for a lot of what we see in climate change, and we need to really be careful about what we're creating and the materials we use in it. I personally really looking at how we can repurpose older architecture and older buildings and think about the life cycle of what we're creating. How that is part of the bigger picture. So I just want all the architects who happen to be listening to this, or all the builders that happen to be listening to this, to really pay attention to that.
Agreed.
We cannot continue to be as wasteful as we have been in the past. Materials are precious, and we should treat them such.
And they are finite. Benjamin, what's a good place, a good way for our viewers, anyone that's interested, to contact you?
Well, I feel free to anybody to reach out to me on LinkedIn or on my email. My email is benjamin.g@dpsdesign.org.
Okay. Excellent. I'm really excited for our viewers to see this one, Benjamin.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for coming on board. It was great.
Yeah, I'd really like to get people's insight and opinions too. Feedback is something that helps me grow professionally and personally. So I love it when people challenge me.
Thank you so much for coming on.
And thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate the time to chat.
Likewise.